Ever think about the treasures only wealthy kids had in 1970? Things most of us barely saw, like those giant slot car tracks or glowing color TVs, fresh Polaroid film, and dollhouses fancier than real homes. Today, we're revisiting those glimpses of privilege. Let's start with one iconic luxury: slot car racing set. The first thing that comes to mind is the slot car racing set, the huge one, not the tiny track you might have had. You know the set I'm talking about, the one that took up an entire basement. You always saw it from a distance first, because it practically lit up the room with that glossy black track and those miniature cars that buzzed like angry bees. You could smell the faint burn of the tiny electric motors the moment you walked in. The rich kid didn't just have a loop. They had switch lanes, sharp turns, guardrails, and an elevated bridge that made you feel like you were peering into a real racetrack in miniature. Back then, slot cars weren't cheap toys. They were the closest thing a kid had to controlling a machine. And in the 1970s, when most families were just trying to stretch a dollar, these giant sets looked like luxury engineering. Today, you can buy a digital RC car that connects to Bluetooth without blinking. But do you remember how it felt to squeeze that plastic trigger and feel the speed flood into the car? Did you ever wish you could stay all afternoon in that basement just so you could run one more lap? Color televisions. Then there were the color televisions, specifically the families that had more than one. Having any color TV in 1970 meant you were doing well, but the rich kid, they had a color TV in the living room and another in their bedroom. You remember walking into that room and seeing the soft rainbow glow against the walls from some Saturday morning cartoon. The warmth the TV gave off was part of the charm, that low, steady heat from the back panel. Their TV always seemed too clean, too crisp, like no one in that house ever had to smack the side of the set to fix the signal. Back then, having your own TV wasn't just luxury, it felt like freedom. Today you can watch anything on your phone while half asleep, but do you remember the thrill of adjusting the antenna just right to make the world blossom into color? And did you ever quietly wonder what it would be like if you had a TV that belonged only to you? Polaroid cameras. Another thing only rich kids had was the first-generation Polaroid cameras, the ones that made every kid gasp the moment the photograph slid out. You can still hear that soft mechanical whir pop as the picture emerged, still damp and ghost-like, waiting to come alive. Rich families always had fresh packs of film, neatly stacked in a kitchen drawer, while the rest of us were taught never to waste a single shot. The Polaroid wasn't just a camera, it was magic on demand. It compressed time. You went from posing to holding a memory in your hand within seconds, shaking it in the air like it needed encouragement. That scent of fresh film, the slightly metallic chemical smell, was part of the experience. Compare that to today, when you can snap 1,000 photos without thinking. Doesn't it make you miss the weight of wanting the picture to be perfect before you press the shutter? And did you ever wish you could have taken that camera home, even just for one afternoon? Furnished dollhouses. Then there were the giant, fully furnished dollhouses, the kind that looked more like architectural studies than toys. These weren't plastic. They were crafted from heavy wood with real wallpaper, miniature chandeliers, and tiny furniture that felt like it belonged in a magazine. You remember seeing your friend open the hinged front wall like it was a secret manor, revealing rooms decorated better than most real houses. You could feel the cool, polished surfaces of the little tables, the sharp scent of varnished wood, the soft click of the tiny doors. These dollhouses cost more than an entire week's salary for a lot of families. They were miniature worlds where the rules were different, and where everything felt elegant and impossibly delicate. Today, kids build virtual houses on tablets in minutes. But back then, wasn't there something sacred about touching those tiny, perfectly crafted objects? Did you ever imagine yourself shrinking down to live inside one of those perfect little rooms? Stereo systems. One more early memory, the top-of-the-line stereo systems. The rich kid's house always had one, a gleaming wood-paneled console with speakers taller than you were. When they played a record, you didn't just hear it, you felt it thrumming in your chest, a deep richness that made your own little record player sound like a tin can. You remember the careful gesture of lifting the needle, that soft, static crackle as it settled into the groove, the warm smell of heated electronics mixed with dust. Records weren't background noise back then, they were events. Today, your phone can stream any album instantly. But do you remember the ritual, the choosing, the cleaning, the flipping? And did you ever wish your living room could sound like that? Custom bicycles. Next on that list of things only the wealthiest kids ever had in 1970 were the custom bicycles, the ones that didn't just roll, but announced themselves when they rounded the corner. You remember the feeling of hearing those smooth tires whisper against the pavement, the chain gliding like it had been oiled by someone who actually knew what they were doing. The rich kid would roll up on a Schwinn Stingray with a metallic finish so bright it looked like a candy wrapper under the sun. The banana seat was flawless, the chrome handlebars rose like handlebars shouldn't logically rise, and those shock absorbers rubbers, they made it look like a tiny motorcycle. You could smell the new rubber scent every time they parked the bike, like it had just come from the store. Meanwhile, your own bike, if you had one, was probably a hand-me-down with a seat patched up in places and handlebar grips that were always coming loose. Today, you can buy a full suspension mountain bike at any sporting goods store. But back then, a Stingray with white walls was royalty on wheels. Do you remember how badly you wanted just one ride, even if it was only up the street and back? Futuristic furniture. Now, think about the rich kid's bedroom, not the posters or the bedding, you're remembering the furniture. Specifically, the futuristic bunk beds or loft beds that felt like something out of a spaceship. Their beds weren't squeaky metal frames or creaking box springs. They were sculpted wooden structures with built-in drawers, maybe even a desk tucked underneath, with smooth tracks that let the drawers glide out without sticking. There was a smell to that high-end furniture, a warm mix of varnish and wood polish that made the whole room feel more grown-up than anything you had at home. Those beds didn't just hold a mattress, they shaped the entire room. Today, a loft bed is something you can buy online and assemble yourself in an hour. But back then, they were premium imports or specialty store pieces that cost more than anyone you knew could justify. Did you ever see one and think it made your whole bedroom feel small by comparison? Electronic calculators. And then there were electronic calculators, the real ones, the early, expensive ones that made any kid who owned one instantly look like a genius. In 1970, a calculator wasn't a cheap plastic toss-it-in-your-backpack thing. A calculator then was cutting-edge, heavy, made of metal. It clicked with authority. The red LED numbers glowed like something from a sci-fi film. Only rich kids brought them to school, usually tucked into a leather case their parents bought as if protecting a precious instrument. Teachers didn't even know how to feel about them yet. Most calculators cost more than a week's pay, and owning one felt like being given the keys to some higher level of adulthood. Today, you have a full scientific calculator built right into your phone. But do you remember the awe of seeing a kid punch in numbers and get answers instantly? No pencil tapping, no long division, just that smooth electronic hum? Did you ever wish you had your own just so you could feel that glow in your hand? Electric train sets. And we cannot forget the electric train sets, the high-end ones with metal locomotives, real smoke pellets, tiny working lights, and carefully landscaped tracks. The rich kid never had a simple oval track on the carpet. Oh no, their setup was on a dedicated table, complete with tunnels, bridges, tiny handmade trees, painted mountains, miniature people frozen mid-stride, and a small station that even lit up when the train passed. The scent of the electric transformer warming up filled the room, a smell you never forgot. Running one of those trains felt like controlling a whole world. Today you can download games that let you build digital train networks in minutes. But do you remember being mesmerized by the way that little engine clicked along the rails, steady as a heartbeat? Did you ever imagine traveling inside that mini world, even for just one lap? Portable cassette recorder. Another hallmark of wealth in 1970 was the portable cassette recorder, the first time you saw someone who could record their own voice instantly. The rich kid didn't just have the player, they had the recorder, the blank tapes, the built-in microphone, and the satisfying clunk of those mechanical buttons. Playing music became a completely different experience. You could hear the warm hiss behind the sound, the tape winding inside its little plastic cage. The recorder smelled faintly of warmed plastic and metal when it ran too long. Today you can record your voice by tapping a single icon, but back then, didn't it feel like witchcraft? And did you ever wish you could record secret messages or make your own mixtapes long before the rest of us could? Automatic ice maker. Now picture the kitchen, specifically the rich kid's kitchen with an automatic ice maker. In 1970, that was futuristic. Most families had those metal ice trays you had to twist until they snapped, if they didn't freeze your fingers off first. But the rich kid, they pulled open a drawer and scooped out perfect little cubes like it was nothing. You heard that rhythmic clicking sound as the machine dropped fresh ice into the tray. It felt almost unreal to see something so effortless. And you can still remember how cold the air felt on your face when they opened the freezer door. Today, it's a standard feature in most homes. But do you remember thinking it was the height of extravagance? Did you ever wonder what other features their fridge had that you'd never seen before? Fancy lunchboxes. And then there were the fancy lunchboxes, not the regular tin ones everyone else had. Those were common enough, but the insulated, plush-lined ones that looked more like handbags or miniature luggage. These weren't just lunchboxes, they were statements. They zipped instead of snapped. They had compartments, actual compartments for different foods. Some even had built-in thermos holders that kept everything snug. When the rich kid unzipped theirs, you could smell the perfectly packed lunch inside. Always something a bit nicer than what you brought. Today, lunch containers are a whole industry of their own. But back then, didn't it feel like only a select few kids got to eat out of something so official? Did you ever glance at yours and imagine replacing it with something like theirs? High-end science kits. Let's revisit another rich kid staple, the high-end science kits. Not the simple ones with a couple of test tubes and a packet of baking soda. These were large boxed sets that opened up like briefcases filled with real glass beakers, metal burners, powders in labeled vials, tiny tools that made you feel like an apprentice chemist. You can still remember the smell of the chemicals, sharp, clean, and a little unnerving. These kits came with thick manuals filled with experiments that felt forbidden, like you were dabbling in secrets adults didn't want kids to know. Today, you can buy STEM kits for any age, but back then, having a science kit like that felt like you had gained access to a private laboratory. Did you ever wish you could have taken one home to run every experiment in the book? Transistor radios. Remember the early transistor radios, specifically the high-end ones with polished cases, crystal clear tuning, and leather carrying straps. The rich kid's radio could pick up stations you didn't even know existed. When they turned the dial, you could hear the stations glide into focus with perfect clarity instead of drowning in static. There was something magical about hearing music in a device so small. Today, music follows you everywhere, streaming invisibly. But do you remember tracing your fingers along the cool metal grill of a transistor radio, wondering when you'd get one of your own? Home swimming pool. Another unmistakable symbol of wealth in 1970 was the home swimming pool, the kind that didn't come from a catalog or sit above ground like a giant blue drum. The rich kid had the in-ground pool, the kind lined with smooth concrete or bright aqua tile that shimmered under the sun. You remember the smell the moment you walked into their backyard, that sharp sting of chlorine mixing with warm, humid air, drifting over the water like a thin, invisible fog. Their pool had a filter system humming softly in the background, a sound you could feel vibrating through the patio stones if you sat close enough. Most families didn't even dream of having a pool. It was too expensive, too demanding, too much maintenance. But the rich kid dove in headfirst without a care, water sliding off them in sparkling beads. Today you can buy inflatable backyard pools in minutes. But do you remember standing at the edge of a real in-ground pool, wondering what it would be like to have that entire blue world just a few steps from your back door? Did you ever wish you could have just one day where the pool belonged to you? High-end art supplies. Then there were the high-end art supplies, something that always stood out because they looked too nice for any kid to use. Wealthy kids had pristine sets of watercolor paints arranged in metal tins, or sketchbooks with thick, textured pages that made pencil strokes feel buttery smooth. Their colored pencils weren't the cheap, waxy ones that snapped if you pressed too hard. These were the expensive brands, the ones that came in long wooden boxes and smelled faintly of cedar. Even their crayons had richer pigments, smoother laydown, and paper labels that didn't peel messily. Today, art materials are more accessible than ever. But do you remember looking at those perfect sets and thinking they belonged in an art studio, not a bedroom? Did you ever secretly wish you could draw with tools that felt like they could make anything look good? Private music lessons. And then you had the kids with private music lessons who owned real instruments. Good ones, not the starter versions most people rented from school. These weren't dented trumpets or scratched violins. These were polished, carefully maintained instruments kept in hard cases lined with velvet. You can still remember the smell when they opened the case, a mix of varnish, wood, and old fabric. Their piano at home wasn't a flimsy keyboard. It was a full upright, or even a baby grand, the kind that made sound vibrate through the floors. When they practiced, the notes filled the whole house. Today, anyone can download a music app. But back then, did you ever feel a little jealous listening to someone play an instrument that looked like it came from a concert hall? Did you ever wonder what kind of music you could have made if you'd had something like that? Private family camera. Another luxury that defined wealth in 1970 was the private family camera for home movies. Not photos, the movie camera. The rich kid's dad always had one. You remember the soft, ticking noise as the Super 8 film ran through the body of the camera, and the warm smell of the film canisters stored in leather cases. Their home movies had real color, real movement, capturing birthdays, vacations, even normal afternoons in a way that felt unreal to everyone else. Most families relied on word-of-mouth storytelling or a few printed photos photographs, but the rich kid could rewind time. Today you can film anything instantly. But do you remember the fascination of watching a projector wheeze to life, casting flickering images on a living room wall? Did you ever imagine your own life looking that magical on film? Designer clothing and shoes. Another standout, designer clothing and shoes. Not just nice clothes, pieces you could tell were expensive, even if you were too young to understand why. The rich kid had jackets with proper lining, sweaters made of real wool instead of scratchy blends, shoes that stayed perfect no matter how much they ran around. You remember the smell of new leather, that slightly sweet and earthy scent, and the way their clothes felt heavier because they were made properly. You might have had one good outfit, reserved for holidays or school pictures, but they had a closet full of things that looked like they came from a different world. Today, clothes cycle through trends faster than ever. But back then, did you ever glance at their outfits and wonder how someone could look so crisp all the time? High-end walkie-talkies. And let's not forget the high-end walkie-talkies, the real ones. Not the toy versions that cut out every 3 seconds. Rich kids had proper long-range sets, the kind that used actual radio frequencies. When they clicked the button, you heard that sharp burst of static, followed by their voice crackling through clear and strong. The antennas were long, straight, and slightly flexible, and the whole unit felt heavy in your hand, like a tool instead of a toy. Today, kids can message each other instantly, but back then, didn't hearing someone respond from several houses away feel like you were part of a secret mission? Did you ever hope they'd hand you the spare so you could be part of their imaginary world for an afternoon? Home air conditioning. We also have to talk about the kids who had early home air conditioning that reached every room, not just the living room. Back then, most families opened windows, turned on fans, or relied on one noisy unit that barely cooled half the house. But the rich kid? Their house felt like stepping into another climate entirely. That sharp, cold draft hit your skin the moment you walked in, sending a shiver through you even in July heat. The air smelled fresher, drier, cleaner. Air conditioning in every room meant comfort. The rest of us only felt at the movie theater. Today, central air is common. But back then, did you ever feel a wave of jealousy when you realized their bedroom was just as cool as their living room? Fancy desk setups. Another thing that stood out was the fancy desk setup some kids had for homework. Solid wood desks with deep drawers, smooth writing surfaces, real brass handles, and overhead lamps that gave off a warm, steady glow. Meanwhile, you might have done homework at the kitchen table, pushing aside salt shakers and placemats. Their desk made schoolwork feel almost professional. They had pen sets and holders, built-in organizers, maybe even a globe sitting in the corner. Today, kids have study apps and laptop stands, but do you remember the quiet dignity of a real desk? One that looked like it belonged in an office instead of a bedroom? Did you ever think homework might feel easier if your space looked like that? Toy chest. Now picture the rich kid's toy chest, not the box itself, the contents, specifically the incredible model kits they owned. Airplanes, rockets, ships, cars, the fancy ones with hundreds of tiny pieces, detailed instruction booklets, decals you had to line up perfectly, and miniature paint jars that smelled like enamel and sharp solvents. Their kits were works of art, displayed proudly on shelves where you could see every rivet and panel line. Meanwhile, maybe your model kit had parts that didn't quite fit or paint that smeared a little no matter how careful you were. Today, makers can 3D print anything they imagine. But do you remember watching a rich kid place the final piece on their model like they had just completed something monumental? Did you ever want one of those museum-quality kits for yourself? Magic marker collection. And then there was the Magic Marker Collection. Not regular markers, the expensive felt-tip ones that glided across paper with ridiculously smooth ink flow. They always had colors you'd never seen before. Deep burgundy, bright turquoise, rich olive, smoky gray. Unscrewing the cap released that unmistakable alcohol ink scent. These weren't for scribbling, they were for creating. Today you can buy huge marker sets anywhere. But back then, did you ever feel a little thrill when the rich kid offered to let you try one, even if you only got a single stroke? High-end toy projector. Another marker of wealth that always stood out in 1970 was the high-end toy projector, the kind that let the rich kid turn their bedroom into a miniature movie theater. These weren't the flimsy plastic handheld ones with blurry images. These were heavy, metal-bodied projectors with real film strips you could feed through sprockets. When it turned on, the bulb gave off a warm, dusty smell as it heated up, and the soft whir of the reels filled the room with a steady rhythm. Their walls came alive with giant moving pictures, cartoons, science films, old Hollywood shorts, everything larger than life. Meanwhile, the rest of us only saw moving images at the theater or on TV. Today you can stream anything in full HD instantly. But do you remember how magical it felt to see a room light up with a tiny projector doing its best to imitate a cinema? Did you ever imagine what it would feel like to sleep under those moving pictures every night? Electric fondue set. And then there was the fancy kitchen gadget that only the wealthiest families had, the electric fondue set. In 1970, fondue
2025, user named RD Academics shared a post claiming, Hulk Hogan recently spotted in a car listening to the new Young Thug. He faked his own death. This post was accompanied by an actual clip showing a man who appeared to be Hulk sitting in the driver's seat of a yellow Dodge Ram, wearing a green shirt, bandana, and glasses, enthusiastically nodding along to music on the radio. It seemed like damning evidence. How could footage exist of Hogan vibing to music if he was supposedly deceased? But here's where the story falls apart under minimal scrutiny. The video was immediately recognizable to fans as a clip from a 2007 episode of Hogan's reality television show Hogan Knows Best. In the original scene from Episode 4, Hogan's Extreme Makeover, Hogan was shown enthusiastically enjoying Young Thug's song I Love It, replaying it while driving. The scene became a beloved meme within wrestling communities, often shared with captions about rent-free in fans' heads. The new Young Thug audio in the 2025 post simply edited over the original clip, replacing the Young Easy track with a Young Thug song to create the recent footage. The MTV logo visible in the corner of the video was a dead giveaway to anyone paying attention, as well as the fact that the original clip had been uploaded to YouTube back in 2014 and had accumulated millions of views over the years. Remarkably, another user had actually predicted this exact phenomenon 3 days earlier, posting, "Somebody's gonna paste that Young Thug song over the Hulk Hogan Jeezy video, and we're all gonna laugh too hard." The prophetic nature of that prediction highlighted just how predictable internet culture had become. The Jeezy so iconic, so frequently shared and remixed, that its weaponization as evidence of Hogan's survival was inevitable. Multiple TikTok accounts had been sharing variations of the clip throughout 2022-2025, each adding their own musical twist. The post received only 2 views and 1 like, suggesting most viewers immediately recognized the but it still represented an important example of how easily old footage could be repurposed for conspiracy content.
Wasn't a broadcast? Did you ever wish you could stay at their house hours longer just to play one more round? Full set of encyclopedias. Another unmistakable sign, the kids who had a full set of encyclopedias. Not a mismatch of used volumes bought one at a time, the complete glossy set. These books were heavy, perfectly aligned on the shelf, each one smelling of fresh ink and smooth paper. The gold lettering on the spines gleamed like treasure. And inside, the world. Photographs, diagrams, maps, explanations of everything from volcanoes to presidents to galaxies. For a wealthy family, a full encyclopedia set was a symbol of sophistication, education, and opportunity. Most families couldn't afford one, especially the new editions. Today, you have infinite information at your fingertips. But do you remember the awe of running your fingers along the spines of those volumes, wishing you could take just one home? Did you ever flip through a page and feel like you were touching knowledge that didn't belong to you? Long-distance family vacations. Then there were the long-distance family vacations. The rich kid who came back after summer with stories of trips to Europe, Mexico, Hawaii, or cross-country road adventures in huge station wagons. They always had souvenirs, postcards, patches, little soaps from hotels, foreign coins that glittered like tiny medals. Their photos showed beaches, castles, mountains, and museums. You could almost smell the ocean when they told the story, or taste the strange foods they described. Meanwhile, your own summer might have meant staying home, visiting relatives, or maybe a short camping trip if things went well. Today, affordable travel is more accessible for many families. But do you remember listening to a kid talk about snorkeling in clear blue water? Or exploring ancient ruins and thinking, what must it feel like to see that with your own eyes? Did you ever imagine stepping into those postcard scenes yourself? Access to packaged snack foods. Another luxury, one you may not have thought about until now, was early access to packaged snack foods and name-brand treats. The rich kid's pantry was an entire wonderland. Cookies that came in trays, chips in shiny bags, little pastries wrapped in crinkly plastic, brightly colored cereals that left sugary trails in the milk. You remember opening their cupboards and smelling that sweet processed aroma, vanilla, chocolate, preservatives, and something you couldn't quite name, but instantly recognized as expensive. Meanwhile, your house might have had simple staples or homemade snacks. Today, snacks are everywhere. But do you remember staring at those boxes and wondering what it felt like to pick anything you wanted without worrying about cost? Did you ever hope they'd offer to share just one? Remote-controlled cars. Another showstopper, the kids with early remote-controlled cars. Not the wired versions, not the cheap wind-up toys, but the true RC cars. Heavy, built from real metal, with rubber tires and handheld radio transmitters that crackled when you turned them on. You could smell electricity in the air when the cars zipped across the driveway, kicking up dust and skidding expertly around corners. They moved fast, faster than seemed possible back then. Most families wouldn't dream of spending that kind of money on a toy. Today, RC tech is everywhere, but do you remember watching those cars and feeling like you were witnessing miniature engineering miracles? Did you ever hope they'd let you take the controls just once? Personal grooming tools. And we can't forget about the kids who had personal grooming tools. The early electric toothbrushes, the fancy hair dryers with multiple attachments, or vanity setups with adjustable lights around the mirror. Their bathrooms always smelled like expensive soaps and perfumes, subtle and gentle, not the harsh scents found in cheaper products. You might have had a simple bar of soap and a towel, but they had entire drawers of lotions, sprays, and accessories. Today, grooming products are more accessible. But back then, did you ever feel mesmerized by how organized and elegant their routines looked? Newest school supplies. And one more, the kids who always had the newest school supplies. Mechanical pencils before anyone else had seen them. 3-ring binders with glossy covers and zipper pouches. Notebooks with perfectly smooth paper. Pencil cases with clicking compartments, each tool in its place. Their supplies didn't squeak or tear or break. They worked. You could smell the newness of their stuff. Fresh paper, fresh plastic, ink waiting to be used. Today, fancy school supplies are everywhere. But do you remember looking at their tools and wondering how much easier school must have been when everything you used was built to last? By now, you've probably remembered more than a few things you haven't thought about in years. Maybe you've even felt some of that old longing bubble back up, that curiosity, that admiration, that little ache that comes from wanting something you knew your family simply couldn't afford. So now I want to ask you something. Which memory from this list hit you the hardest? Which thing did a rich kid you knew have and you still remember wanting? Tell me in the comments. And if you want more deep dives into the memories you didn't know you still carried, check out the suggested cards showing on your screen for more.